So I'm on a tripod. I'm selecting a 640 ISO f/16 for the depth of field, which yields, the camera now decides that 1/8 of a second is the proper exposure. The problem with this exposure is that when I take a picture which has a lot of white in it, the white is making everything else look dark. If we look at the histogram, we will see that this represents black, this represents white, and this represents middle gray. And that's exactly what the camera attempts to do, is evaluate the scene and then make sure that it averages it out. It's not often in an outdoor scene where you have a photograph that has so much white in it. And this is an instance where, taking a photograph of artwork, you want to ensure that you compensate for the method that the camera evaluates the exposure. So, in my camera, this 0 says that it's properly exposed. As an artist, I know that this white looks gray, and the histogram informed me that it was gray, and that's where I'm going to increase it by 1 stop and 2/3, and that I'm getting at by trial and error. The f-stop did not change, the ISO did not change, my camera mode did not change. I simply am telling it to expose it at ISO 640 at f/16 f-stop, and when you calculate the shutter speed, you're going to calculate the shutter speed by compensating an additional amount of exposure. Now, it's going to shoot it at 4/10 of a second. I'm going to use my cable release. You can see now that the histogram has indicated that the white areas are much closer to what yields white. It tells me here that I've taken a picture of it with 1 2/3 exposure compensation, 1/4 of a second at f/16, and I've used auto white balance, and this is the format that I'm using. And there's the picture. It looks a little bright on the screen, and if I want to be safe, then what I'm going to do is do this at 1 1/3. 1 1/3. I'll take a picture. I'll evaluate it, and if I want to be even more, with 1 second. I'm taking it with 1 f-stop of exposure compensation. As in the previous one, that was on white, I selected f/16, 640 ISO, and I started with my light meter with 0 exposure compensation and aperture priority, and in this case manual focus. If I view it, you can see it has a lot of dark area. If I take a picture and bring in the histogram, it tends to focus within the middle. There's nothing in here that's real bright white, but you can see the paper that's black is still not as dark as it could be. So I use the histogram sometimes just to see where the light areas and the dark areas fall within this graph. On my camera, the left side symbolizes black, the right side symbolizes white. In order to make the black background darker, I'm going to reduce the exposure compensation. It didn't seem to, I need a lot, so I'm going to, and you can see it went from a third, 3/10 of a second, 3/10 of a second. When I decrease the light, it's 0.25 of a second. Now it's a half a second. If I take a picture, the light in this scene is coming from this direction, and it does illustrate that this area is lighter and this is darker, and that's because the light source is here on the left. And I often find it's hard for me to make real critical decisions on these screens. But if I bring up the info, now we can see it went a little closer to the left. And if I want to take another picture, say 1 f-stop less of exposure compensation, it's now going to take it for a sixth of a second, and you can see it might be hard to see on the screen how much different it is, but using this we can see that it is a little closer to the left.